Wild Bill Hickok was a man ahead of his time. While most men in the 1860s were still wearing fancy suits and silk hats, Hickok wore practical clothing suited for the outdoors and carried pistols instead of a pocket watch. But he's best known for the events that happened in the historic poker game at the 77 ranch in Deadwood, South Dakota, where he died face down in the cards while holding two pairs, an event that led to one of the most famous poker hands in history being named after him. This is the story of Wild Bill Hickok, the real man behind the legend. James B. Hickok was born on May 3, 1837, near Troy, Illinois. His father, William, owned a tavern, which gave young James access to a steady supply of books that sparked his interest in reading and writing. His mother, Betsy, was largely absent from his childhood, working as a seamstress in a hotel while leaving his older sister, Mary, in charge of taking care of James. The absence of strong parental figures led to a difficult childhood for James, so he ran away from home at the age of 16 to join the circus as a bear hunter. As a bear hunter, his job was to train bears to perform certain tasks, such as riding in a wagon or standing on their hind legs and shooting a pistol. He also performed other acts such as catching bullets with his teeth and knife throwing, but mostly spent his time traveling between performances. At age 19, James joined the U.S. Army and was assigned to the 2nd Artillery Regiment, stationed in Texas. His pay was $13 a month, which was more than he had ever made in his life, but it wasn't enough to keep him out of debt. Soon he was spending his meager wages on gambling and drinking. To make some extra money, he began selling confiscated Mexican blankets off post without permission. When he was caught, he was given the choice to be court-martialed or to resign. He chose to resign. Now dishonorably discharged, Hickok returned to civilian life, having learned little of value during his time in the military. In 1857, he found work as a trail guide for a freight wagon train traveling to California. However, when the train reached Utah, the Mormons there offered them protection if they would convert to Mormonism. Most of the train accepted this offer, but Hickok refused and continued on to California alone. Working various odd jobs to get by, he heard about the discovery of gold in Colorado and decided to head there. But before he could do anything, he was arrested for horse stealing. Apparently someone had stolen a horse and left the saddle and bridle on a rock near where Hickok was camping. When the horse's owner saw this, he assumed that Hickok had stolen the horse and left the saddle and bridle there to throw off any pursuing officers. Although Hickok protested his innocence, no one believed him, and he was sentenced to 4 months in prison. When he was released, he headed north to Idaho, where he met up with a friend from his army days, General George Crook. Crook gave him a position in his supply department, which paid much better than any job he had ever had before. Soon he was making $1,000 a month supplying goods to mining camps and trading posts. But he didn't hold on to that money for long, spending it on whiskey and gambling. At one point, he even put up his entire salary for a poker game and lost. Needing to find a new source of income, he quit his job and traveled to San Francisco to try and buy a ship and start a ferry service. But after arriving, he realized that it would take a lot more money than he had to get started. So he took a job working for Wells Fargo as a guard on a stagecoach, run carrying payroll for the California and Nevada Railroad Company. But while transporting money through dangerous Indian territory, the stagecoach came under attack. While Hickok managed to defend himself against the Native Americans, he accidentally shot and killed one of his fellow guards. With his reputation now ruined, he was fired from Wells Fargo and moved to Virginia City in Nevada to work as a miner. But since he knew nothing about mining, he struggled to make any money. To supplement his income, he worked as a sheriff's deputy, arresting gamblers and prostitutes. In 1865, he married a local saloon keeper named Susan Rayner. But the marriage was short-lived as Susan died only 9 months later. Stricken with grief, Hickok began drinking heavily and considering ending his own life. He went to see a doctor who recommended that he go on a trip to recuperate. He ended up traveling to the Black Hills of South Dakota, an area recently opened to settlers after the end of the Civil War. Here he found work escorting supply trains to remote mining camps. And although he had little success as a miner himself, he discovered gold in one of his employees' claims and became partners. When word spread of gold being discovered in the Black Hills, Prospectors flooded into the area, causing tensions to rise with the Lakota Sioux who had been living there for generations. On June 2, 1876, those tensions boiled over and fighting broke out between the U.S. Army and the Sioux forces. The following day, the Sioux won a decisive victory over General George Custer's regiment, killing or wounding every soldier. The incident became known as Custer's Last Stand. Hickok's name appeared in newspapers across the country for his role in the massacre. He was celebrated as a hero. But when he arrived at his gold mine, he found that everything had been looted and destroyed. Despondent over the loss of his life savings, he rode to Deadwood to try and get a job as a scout or deputy sheriff. After learning of the devastation at the gold mine, the sheriff agreed to hire him as a deputy. Upon arrival in Deadwood, he checked into the 77 Ranch, a large wooden saloon and casino building located near the center of town. It was owned by Seth Bullock, who hired Hickok because of his reputation as a lawman. But as the night wore on, Hickok was unhappy with the way people were trying to cheat him out of his money at the poker table. During a particularly heated hand, he accused another player of cheating and drew his pistol, firing a warning shot into the ceiling. This intimidated the players into letting him win back his money. But the next night, Hickok was confronted by Jack McCall, a notorious gambler who had lost $300 to Hickok the previous evening. He was now armed with a pistol of his own. McCall stood over Hickok and asked him for a rematch. Played several hands of poker together, with McCall winning the first 3 games. But then Hickok won the next 3 games. And just as he was about to leave the table, he collapsed face down on the green felt surface. Upon turning him over, it was discovered that he had been shot in the back of the head. One of the bullets passed through his brain, leaving a small exit wound on the side of his head. As the piano player finished the last notes of his song, Deadwood residents rushed to the 77 Ranch to learn the identity of the killer. But when they arrived, they found that the murderer had already fled the scene. Despite being mortally wounded, Hickok remained conscious long enough to tell Seth Bullock that he had been shot by Jack McCall. Bullock immediately set out to capture the murderer with a posse. A reward of $5,000 was placed on McCall's head, equivalent to over $137,000 today. It took only 2 hours to find him. The posse ambushed him while he was trying to ride out of town. Upon hearing the news of Hickok's death, McCall calmly surrendered and admitted to the murder. At his trial, he tried to claim that Hickok had pulled the trigger himself while reaching for his own pistol. But the jury quickly found him guilty and sentenced him to death by hanging. 2 weeks later, he was led to the gallows, where he confessed to the murder, apologized to Hickok's family, and asked for forgiveness. When asked if he had any last words, he said, "I want to tell you all that I am not the man I was represented to be in the newspapers. I have never been a deputy sheriff and don't know how to handle a gun." Then he climbed onto the scaffold and dropped the black cap over his head. The trap was sprung, and Jack McCall was dead. Following his death, Wild Bill Hickok became a larger-than-life figure in Western lore. The hand of cards that he held at the time of his death, 2 pairs of aces and eights, became known as the dead man's hand, leading many to believe that it was a good omen for gamblers. However, this is not true. In fact, the dead man's hand is the second worst hand in poker. Only a royal flush beat the dead man's hand. To learn about the top poker hands, check out this episode. To learn about other famous Wild West outlaws, check out this playlist.